Good evening, everyone. I'm John Hockenberry. Great to be here once again at the World Science Festival. So, Mind and Machines, is it? It's so fabulous to have such a great turnout. It's always amazing to come out to see what folks at this festival will turn out to listen to and respond to and be so excited by. I like to think of the World Science Festival in the beginning, back in 2008, it was, Brian Greene and Tracy Day's just insane idea. But now it's become actually Brian Greene's opportunity every year to give all of New York a pop quiz. This is what professors yearn to do, right? This is to gather people together, give them a little download, and then your quiz will be coming in the mail. If you've signed up for the festival, you'll actually get a quiz. In the end, we'll all be graded, and maybe we'll get advanced degrees directly from Brian. But the idea that we can all interact and understand science and not have to be scientists, or maybe we are scientists, is just a wonderful miracle of this festival, and it's why I love to come here. So, Mind and Machines, right? Anybody use tools in the audience? Come on, clap if you do. Come on. All right, call them out, your favorite tools. What? Vice grips, that's a good one. What? Fork, excellent tool. What, say again? Pen, excellent tool. What, say again? Say it. Computer. Yeah, a lot of people like that. How old are you? 11. There we go. I heard someone say iPhone. iPhone, right? Music. Well, since you ask. Some tools have a great feel, right? Some tools are very, very useful. Some tools are cool because, like an iPhone, they get you to places. You can watch movies, that sort of thing. But tools have a physical interaction with us, right? And a sort of psychological interaction with us, right? And part of our mission here tonight is to explore where the physical ends and the sort of brain, the neurons, begin. Anybody know why a flute looks like this? Come on, you guys got some theories. Come on, why? Say again? No, but why does it look like this? Why? That's pretty odd looking, don't you think? Well, sound, of course. It has this hole to make a sound. But why all this stuff? Look at this complicated mess. What? To change the pitch, okay, but it changes the pitch in a very special way. What changes the pitch? What part of me changes the pitch? Exactly. So in a sense, what you're saying here is that something in my brain is thinking music. That sends a signal here to my hands. And my hands interact with this object, which in a sense is speaking a language. What language is this object speaking? What? What is it speaking? Say it again? Math? No. There may be a mathematical way of specifying what this is doing. No, it's speaking hand. It speaks hand. This shape speaks hand. The hand speaks music to the flute speaks back to the hand. Pianos do the same thing. You think the piano looks like that because of music? No, because of hands. Our interaction, man-machine, mind-machine, is often and mostly, especially with the vice grips, through the hand. So the hand speaks to the object, the brain speaks to the hands, and you get Now, if the hands speak badly, you get a mediocre flute player, right? If the hands speak really well, you get a great flute player. But it's all about the same sort of interface and interaction, and that's what we're exploring here. Certain machines speak through the hands, certain machines speak through the eyes, certain objects, certain interactions that human beings have come through the skin. basically our bodies are predisposed to interact with the environment in all kinds of ways. And so the idea of collaborating with machines is not a new one. It certainly didn't begin with the iPhone. And so the idea tonight is to explore just how made we all are to interact with machines. That our bodies themselves are channels to get what's in here, out here, and to get what's out here, back in here. So to explore that tonight, we have an unbelievable panel of people who are going to present some science that's absolutely cutting edge tonight, some big ideas that are as big as anything at the festival, and the mission for all of you is to remember that everything that we're talking about on stage here is it may be more sophisticated. It may involve a little more math, and we love math, absolutely love math. But it's no different, really, than the impulse to pick up those vice grips and do what you need to do, because your fingers need the vice grips to get what the brain wants done. So we begin with John Donoghue, who is the founding chairman of the Department of Neuroscience at Brown. John, come on out here. He's currently the director of the Brown Institute for Brain Science. He served on a number of panels for the NIH, the NSF, and NASA, and other federal agencies, and was a fellow of the American Institute for Medical and Biomedical Engineering. John, thanks so much for being here. Also, Luciano Floridi. Luciano has found at least two areas of research: information ethics and philosophy of information. He was the first philosopher elected Gauss professor at the Göttingen Academy of Sciences, and he's currently a professor of philosophy at the University of Hertfordshire and fellow at St. Cross College at the University of Oxford. He is editor-in-chief of Philosophy and Technology. Luciano, thanks so much for being here. Please welcome my dear friend from the MIT Media Lab, Rosalind Picard. Roz is founder and director of the Effective Computing Research Group at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Media Lab, and co-director of the Things That Think Consortium, and director, and we'll hear about this tonight, of MIT's new Autism Communication Technology Initiative. Thank you for being here, Roz. And finally, Gary Small. Gary Small is an inventor, a co-inventor of the first brain scanning technology to detect physical evidence of Alzheimer's disease in living people. Scientific American Magazine named Dr. Small as one of the world's top innovators. He's a professor of psychiatry at UCLA, where he directs the Memory and Aging Research Center and the Center on Aging. So, great panel. One more time here. So, John, let's begin with you. The idea of getting signals from the brain and using those signals to make things happen in the outside is a fascinating problem if we have to think about using interfaces other than the hands, other than our wonderful bodies. First of all, what is the brain doing when it's trying to get a signal to the outside?
Well, basically, your brain is connected to your body fundamentally through a million wires that connect your brain to your spinal cord and then to your muscles. So when you think to play the flute, those signals are concocted in your brain and pass through those million wires and come out to your body.
Does my brain care if it's a flute or if it's a piano or if it's a synthesizer?
Sure. Well, you're going to have to concoct a different plan, a different idea about how you're going to interact with that instrument, because each instrument has a different set of rules. With the flute, it's fingers. With the cello, it might be your wrist on one side and your fingers on another.
When my brain decides to learn to do piano or flute or Rubik's Cube, are those fundamentally different languages of physical, neural interaction?
Well, the interaction, we don't really know all there is in the brain. It's quite mysterious still. But basically, there are some rules we do understand. And at the highest level, your brain thinks about your hand and your arm and orchestrating it a little bit like a puppeteer pulls the strings on the puppet's limbs to move the limbs around. And so those are the basic instructions, and we know something about those. The ones that are more abstract, we're a little less certain about.
What is a thought? Do you know?
No, I think we don't really know what a thought is, but its basis lies in some of the neural impulses and the collaboration of millions of neurons to come up with set patterns that these patterns then drive your muscles, which is really the only thing you can do is
Well,
run your muscles.
let's see some examples here. The idea of getting signals from the brain to do sort of simple things in the external world. There are obvious applications for this. Describe some of the applications of the work that you're working on.
Right. So this BrainGate project that we're working on is literally to reconnect the brain to the outside world for people who are paralyzed, people who have had that connection broken, either by injury or by disease, such as a stroke or even ALS, as Stephen Hawking has. And what we do is for these individuals, we're placing a tiny sensor in the brain that will pick up the signals about what they want to do with their arm. We're bringing those signals to the outside, and because of the basic science that we've had, the basic knowledge that we have, we can interpret those signals pretty well, not great, pretty well, and then allow people who can't move at all to be able to interact with the world. And the first thing we did is had an individual interact with the computer in a very simple way to say, can you manipulate anything using direct brain to computer?
All right, let's see the first animation here.
So Pong was one of the first things that we were able to do with computers.
It shows something at a really high level that was going to bring world peace.
Very cerebral.
Yes.
Yes. So here you see a young man, his name is Matthew Nagel, and he's playing a video game. He's controlling that little blue Pong device with signals directly from his brain. You can see just his head with a plug, which we now have to actually connect the brain to a computer through a plug on his head. And he's moving that cursor around, and he's moving the little paddle around just by thinking about moving it left or right.
And how do you measure that? How do you decode what's going on in there using this plug?
Well, inside his head is this baby aspirin-sized platform, and it has 100 little hairs coming from it, and those go just into the brain surface and pick up electrical impulses from about 100 of the millions of neurons that are there, sort of like little radio broadcast towers. And they look like not much when they come out, but we can interpret those.
And who was the subject in the Pong?
So the first individual, he was the first of now 5 people who have had this implant done in a very early stage pilot trial. And his name was Matthew Nagel, and he had a spinal cord injury at very high level.
And did you say to Matthew, hey, dude, we can put this plug in your head and you'll be able to play Pong? And he went, yeah, sign me up for that.
Well, he actually, one of his first, we had a hand that he could open and close, and the first time he said it, I'll delete the expletive, but he went, holy sh... You can fill in the rest.
It seems a little crude here. You might have to have a bazillion of these things to actually do anything.
Nope. The part of your brain that controls your arm sort of has a whole master set of plans for your whole arm. So even from a tiny patch of your brain, you can really orchestrate many, many different actions. That's something that, again, we've learned from science recently.
Including the motion of a wheelchair. And let's take a look at your last video here.
Well, this is, can you do other practical things if you can't move your arms to move around in a wheelchair? Could you do it by thought? And here, there's the TV screen on that motorized wheelchair is a computer, and she's thinking left, right, forward, and backward, and I've actually asked her to try to drive. This is literally the first time she ever tried this, to drive over to that white door you see, and she's sort of getting her bearings, turning it around left and right, and then you'll see her make it go forward, and she'll drive it over to the door. I think this was just a couple of minutes later when she's just sort of getting a sense of how to get it to go where she wants.
And all just through thought.
Simply by thinking about it, and then, as I said, there's a computer that's transmitting signals to that to tell it to go left and right.
There's no grad student behind that shelf going to the left.
I will tell you that even if you're using a joystick to control the wheelchair, it's a little tricky because the controller that's telling you what's happening is mounted on the wheelchair. So she's sitting there in the room watching it go across. And you'll see, and now I think she gets the idea and then heads it off towards the door.
Oh, nice.
So it's not ready for, driving across the street yet. We're getting to say, what can you really do by directly interacting with machines? So these are some of the first experiences of people interacting with very complex devices directly through their brain.
Great. John Donoghue, thank you so much. So to come right off the wheelchair example, I mean, when I first realized that I was paralyzed for the rest of my life and had to use a wheelchair, it was very uncomfortable sort of interacting with this machine, and you used the term confined to a wheelchair, and that made a lot of sense at the time as I learned how to move this thing around. But 34 years later, and really actually within a matter of months later, I was developing a real sense of intimacy with this machine, with this device, to the point where much more quickly than I could have imagined, and certainly more quickly than my mother, who looked at me in a wheelchair and said, "Oh, no, how horrible," I would say, "No, it's me, Mom. It's me. It really feels like me." There was a level of sort of physical intimacy with this object that even surprised me. How old is that sort of narrative for human beings in interacting with objects in the outside world, that our sense of self migrates to some object?
Oh, it's very old. In fact, actually, it's as old as we are. Move backward, like 3,000 years ago. You are a warrior, you're fighting, you're a Greek warrior under Troy, and you're talking to your weapons. Because your weapons are yourself. You're just part of that sort of shield and sword that are an extension of your body. So the brain is just naturally geared towards this sort of pouring out and extending itself towards the world, the technology. Could be something fancy, like a wheelchair, or something simple, like a pen. That generates a different set of questions, which, again, since we're talking about Greek guys, has been with us for some time. And that's the sort of dualism that we have with our bodies, because we have that normal tendency to extend them through technologies, but we also have sort of second thoughts about who we are. We're not our bodies, sometimes, or at least some of us think so. So while the brain naturally tends towards expanding and implementing itself through technology in the world, at the same time, we have that impression of someone being completely detached and re-engineered, transformed into a new body with the same brain. So at the same time, we expand the brain with the technology, but we also detach the brain from the body because the brain can be re-implemented elsewhere. And that's the kind of dualism that we philosophers have been discussing, let's say, for the past 25 centuries. It's an ongoing discussion, let's say.
And some philosophers say this dualism is completely absurd, that in fact the brain can't be separated from the channels in which it interacts with the outside world. And there are others who say that no, in fact, if you don't have this dualism, you can't actually function in the world. Where do you come down on this?
Well, halfway through, it's like...
half dualist.
Yeah, half dualist. It's a three-quarter, sort of. No, the idea is basically that you need some kind of platform, but you're not geared to that platform. In other words, it's like a piece of software that you can run on different machines. So you need a machine to run that piece of software, but not necessarily that machine only. So if you can move through different platforms, like the lady we saw in the videos before, she is able to move to a different implementation of physical platform with the same brain. So she's not geared in such a way that she is one piece with her body, and without that particular body, she's lost.
Does the brain care if it's the body that it's interacting with the physical world versus a space arm or a wheelchair or a remote control violin or even a violin? Does the body care?
Okay, well, that is an individual question. Some bodies will, some bodies will not. So,
some brains will, and some brains.
Yes, so it matters a lot of what kind of interactions you're having. For example, if you are someone who plays sport, a particular sport, the enjoyment of the physical nature of that particular sport might be part of the whole activity. So having that particular body will matter more than just being able to win. But if someone, for example, is more inclined towards having a mental life, independently of whether you pick up the particular glass with your own arm or with a robot arm, then the result is rather indifferent. So I would say, again, halfway through, I'm afraid that's what philosophers are.
Well, but I think what you're saying, right, and philosophers do this kind of middle-of-the-road thing, and,
They tend to...
God, we love them
it's
for
always
it.
grey.
Yes, we do love them for it, yes. No answers from us. No.
Well, lots of questions.
Lots of questions, that's right.
We're good at
that's
questions.
Right, yeah. Don't pin us down, no, sir. But down through history, there is this tension between how malleable the brain is for thinking about its relationship to the body and the information that is available in the world. And we've seen down through history enormous changes in the way that we interact. How would you describe those changes? What are the sort of red letter dates, the sort of moments that say to you that these relationships have really changed down through history?
I think there's a classic, super classic sort of moment when philosophers got really scared by the new technology. They thought that was it. That was the end of every culture, anything they had ever learned, and that was the 5th century before Christ. When Plato is writing and says, look, this writing stuff, the invention of writing, it's going to be the end of it. No,
so they were worried about texting back then, even.
It was awful, yeah. And we've been concerned ever since.
Yes.
So basically, yes, the technology has always been a bit of a concern. At that time, the worry was that because we would not have been forced to exercise our memories, then we would have lost that plasticity which comes with having all your Iliad in your brain, as a single text, which of course then you can quote whenever it's needed.
So philosophers were, and maybe parents in school were saying, if we use this writing stuff, my kid won't be able to recite the Iliad. And how much of an idiot will that kid be in social interaction? I mean, that's essentially what you're talking about here.
Yeah. Well, in a way, it's been downhill ever since, if you like. No, it's a joke. No, of course not. Hopefully not. But there's some truth in having too much attention dedicated to too many things at the same time, and as you were thinking horizontally rather than vertically, sometimes if you pay too much attention to the horizon without digging deep into some of the things that you're doing, well, that will affect how proficient you become in that particular topic.
All right, so 5th century before the Christian era, fast forward a little bit to another huge moment in this kind of brain information.
The next thing was wasn't with the invention of writing, but when writing became basically mechanized with the invention of printing. The concern at that point was that it wasn't with human capacities, but with the social aspect of that particular technology. The very idea that anyone could, in principle, have access to information, well, that was liberating in some countries and rather scary in some others. So that was the second moment, roughly speaking, and as we are generalizing, but pretty much when philosophers thought something bad is happening here, or something good, depending on your democratic inclinations.
So when the philosophers start to get nervous, we should be happy that change is taking place?
Well, there are two kinds of philosophers. There are the philosophers, this comes from a great guy called Hegel, who tend to be the kind of CSI philosophers. They get there when someone is already dead. So you shouldn't be worried because whatever was going to happen that was bad has already happened. So that's the philosopher coming at the end of the day and trying to make sense of what has happened in the past. So that's the Hegelian view. Then there are other philosophers, more like sort of a Kantian philosopher, who think in advance. And those are the good guys. The guys who think, well, look, something dodgy is happening here. We better prevent the crime rather than solve who has been the murderous guy afterwards.
Or just think about what the implications are for the future.
Implications are think in advance, better safe than sorry, that kind of people.
All right, how would you contrast, say, the advent of Freud's sort of description of, say, how we interact with the world versus, say, the information age, say, what's going on actually now?
Freud had a wonderful self-serving reconstruction of the history of science. He thought that there were three fundamental revolutions. One was Copernicus, saying that basically reshaping our self-identity because we realize that we're not at the center of the universe. So that big game is over. You're not at the center of anything. So again, Freud says that we retrenched and say, well, we're not at the center of the universe, but we are at the center of life, of biology. And then came Darwin, showing, at least for some of us, that we'd better be careful here, right? That's
just a different session.
Argue.
That's 7 o'clock tomorrow here.
So arguing, rather than proving,
Right.
arguing, that we are not at the center of the biological game either. And then, of course, third came Freud himself, who, on the second trench, not the center of the universe, not the center of human life, no biology, not at the center of the rational game either. We're not transparent to ourselves. There's much more going on in the brain or in the mind than you can think of, and so on. And he said, that's it. That's the final trench. We're done. Actually, if you follow up with these three revolutions, there is a fourth one, which is the one we are suffering or enjoying, depending on your views these days. That fourth revolution shows that basically we are also realizing we're not standalone individuals. We are connected informational organisms that, in order to survive and, in fact, flourish, need a lot of information in and out.
So to relate back to John Donoghue, does the fact that we are information creatures that implies both a physical presence and some sort of virtual presence, does that enable technologies like John Donoghue's, where people have to have some notion of pure thought that can be channeled out into various appliances? And if our self is just fine in this information age, that's going to help technologies like this. That's going to help people not be scared of them. That's going to make them more open to them, maybe to be manipulated by them. A good thing, bad thing?
Well, it should. I mean, if it doesn't, it should. It is enabling in the sense you were just saying. You know, if once we realize that we are informational organisms or inforgs, well, then those inforgs are enabled by some kind of technology, and they can move forward and have more control of themselves. At the same time, there are, as usual, benefits and costs. Some risks are being run because this technology can easily be abused. So as all good technology, I mean, like cars or computers and so on, there's always this double aspect. But I think there's much more to gain than we should be worried about. So it's definitely an enabling technology. Whether it's an enhancing technology, people who have, as it were, quote unquote, normal, everyday, standard bodies, and they want to improve their platform.
Third arm.
Third arm, fourth leg. No.
Fourth leg, yeah.
Or you might want to enjoy ultrasounds. You might want to see ultraviolets.
What would Bartok sound like 30 octaves up?
God knows. Yeah.
Right.
Well, that kind of technology would cause substantial ethical problems, but I think we have more time for this.
All right. Well, let's move on. Thank you, Luciano. And Ros Picard, one of the things that we've sort of begun with here is imagining brains interacting in a fairly straightforward way, making something happen, move something here, using the sort of pure thought platforms that John is developing. But in fact, our brains spend probably most of their time not doing action, but evaluating what's actually going on and trying to figure out if you're really bored up here on this stage, for instance, or if I'm really annoying. The emotional state of the people in the audience, for instance, how are they doing? Everybody happy? In fact, I can't even be sure that that information is correct. So how do computers, and in the kind of work that you're doing, how do you begin to focus on this problem?
Yeah, so actually, as you've pointed out, emotion is there shaping the way that we're thinking and helping us choose what to focus on, biasing our attention and memory and a whole bunch of important elements of thought. And as we try to interpret the feelings of those around us with computers, we use different senses that we've given the computer to do that. So we use cameras, we use microphones, we use some other sensors on the surface of the skin, and we use some of these in ways that might surprise some people here too.
All right, but basically we are looking at this information channel, which is sort of represented by me talking to you, and trying to get more than just my words and your words. That would just be one piece of the conversation. The conversation is also your body language, my body language. It's also things that are happening that I might not even know about on my skin,
Right, on your face.
that are measuring what's going on. And we use all of that to evaluate the emotional state of systems. And the idea is, can we give computers some of these same tools?
That's right, that's right. I can demonstrate.
Yes, please.
If you'd like, okay. We'll see. We'll attempt to do at least one live demonstration up here. This comes up. I'll show first some software that tries to read facial expressions using the built-in camera on the computer. And this is software developed by my colleague, Dr. Rana El-Kalyoubi, who's in Cairo right now, and by my team at MIT. Let's see if this will come up. Live demos always makes us a little nervous here. Let's see if this, for some reason, the camera is not coming on. Here it comes. All right, so you can see my face. Notice that there are orange dots on my face right now, and I didn't just stick orange dots on my face. That's an important distinction, because when you read it from the literature, you can't tell, and some of the authors actually do stick dots on their faces. But this is being done with a tracker. We've developed a lot of trackers at MIT. This particular one was developed by Google and loaned to our work by that. And you can see things like it's tracking my eyebrows, points of my eyes. It works with glasses on or off. It works with different people. This particular version was trained on data from Simon Baron-Cohen's Autism Research Center in Cambridge, because a lot of people on the autism spectrum find it really challenging to read facial expressions in real active conversations. And while we were trying to teach computers to do this, we realized a lot of the tools we were developing could help these folks as well, and others with nonverbal learning disabilities. So you'll see this when I'm staring at it, trying to figure out what it's doing. This blue curve is high. High on this graph is a higher probability, 1 being the highest, 0 being the lowest. And these colors correspond to 6 different models that it's trained on to try to recognize 6 different affective cognitive states. So right now, concentrating is high as I'm looking at it. Now, if I nod my head or smile, then purple peaks up here, and that corresponds to agreeing. Now, I might not actually be agreeing, right? It's just saying that I look like I'm agreeing. Again, it's trained on the actors. Actually, while I said that, the thinking and the
It doesn't register that you're interested at all, I'm noticing here.
Yeah, I've seen this demo a lot, John.
Yeah. Just saying.
The interest is really low. Actually, interest went up when you said that, though. Look at that.
Look at that. There we go.
Like, gee, you're right. I'm really interested in this. And confusion went up right after that, too. And so these are. We've also got some other things up here. I've got individual features here that are, sorry, too small for those of you in the back. Things like, head nod, head shake, head tilt, head turn. Sometimes it's interesting just to look at when people are moving toward the screen. Are they interested, or is the font too small? And when they're backing off, is that aversive, or are they just stretching? How do we interpret these cues? And here we were asked by several of our friends on the autism spectrum if we could simplify all this and just map it to some basic signals in conversation. Like, if the person's concentrating or agreeing, can I just get the green light, keep talking? If they're looking, kind of confused, or they need to slow down to think, or they're really like, what the heck is going on? I get the red light, like, shut up, you're talking too long, Ross. Or maybe one thing we learned is that actually, people sometimes just talk so excitedly they don't give people a moment to think. And just slowing down every now and then helps the person that you're having a conversation with to join in and stay on board with you.
So part of what this is about, that's incredible stuff. Part of what this is about is to take all this data, right? And which are all these nodes on your face, to take all this data and begin to form sort of conjectures about what constitutes various emotions. Is that fair to say there? That you're saying It looks like you're agreeing, but over time, if you study this, you could begin to say with some certainty what the emotional state is.
You can say what it looks like when you're just looking at the face. People can still fool this, of course. It's not reading something inside. And I think there's an important distinction there. There are times when we want to maintain control over what we're communicating, and the face is one of those channels that people maintain a lot of control over, right? We talk about a poker face. And if you show this thing a poker face, it will just give you a flat line.
So, but it says that our ability to evaluate an emotional state depends on a channel of information being open, right? Mm-hmm. Right, and so that's what this is trying to demonstrate. Uh-huh. I noticed you got a sensor there.
Yeah, do you want to try this? I'm wearing one too. Okay.
What is this here?
So this, it's a sweatband that was made at MIT that has an electrodermal activity sensor, a motion sensor inside of it. Inside, under that little padded area. We'll see if the wires survive stretching over your hand. Wires and electronics still don't stretch as well as we'd like. See if
maybe you could work on that up at MIT, the stretching.
Yeah, I know. It's all getting flexible. The batteries are getting flexible.
Right.
The electronics are getting flexible.
All right, so now suddenly you have this like window into my soul here.
So what you guys are now seeing is live wireless from John's body here. This, it's a little bit noisy. It's not being smoothed here. This is
I'll
raw
keep my
data.
hands. I'll
And
stop
it's going up
gesticulating.
nicely, John. Nice and excited here.
I'm excited?
Live demo. Yeah.
Poker face.
Everybody scream.
Higher here.
John Hockenberry. Whoa.
Like that. That's
That was
going up.
exciting.
Woo. Up. Woo. It's pretty cool.
All right, everybody boo. Boo. Oh, that
Still
worked.
pretty excited by the booing, John.
Yeah, I'm not kidding. All right.
A little bit of a dip.
Well, we could try something else. Am I talking too much, honey? Yes. My wife is here. Am I talking too much? Not right now. See, she can make me really nervous. All right, so I just keep my view away from the fourth row entirely. I think that's probably a good idea. All right, well, so describe to me how you might use this in a way other than me doing this sort of shtick up here.
Yeah, actually, we have a video of this being used live for occupational therapy with some kids who are non-speaking and can't describe if they're feeling frustrated or stressed. And often there are people whose motor systems shut down under those states, so they might look like they're detached and calm, when in fact their insides might be a heart rate of 140, 160.
So here's
skin
the
conductance
application?
through. Yeah, so here's a girl who's mostly non-speaking, and her levels are very high. You see on the bottom a long-term graph, and on the top a zoom in of the blue area from the bottom. And this is her peak right now. She is agitated, jumping up and down. So here the electrodermal activity from her skin, the sympathetic nervous system or fight or flight response, is high as one might expect with what they see on the outside, but that's not always the case. And then she climbs in this ball pit. And for some individuals, when they have that deep pressure on their body, like a hug, all the tactile stimulation, that can be very calming for them. And you'll see as she gets in there, it starts to go down. For other people, that can be very stimulating. We'll see some kids hop in there, and their level goes up, and they hop out. And the thing is, sometimes it's very hard to tell from the outside what's going on the inside with a kid. We've had kids who are very agitated looking on the outside, but their level is really low, and maybe they need to go jump on the trampoline, or they need to do something to activate them, to get their attention, to get their body kind of to feel itself and to be in the same state most of us would be in when we're attending.
So before we go to the next one, which is with the same young
But
girl?
A different example.
Right, a different example. How does this change the strategy or the approach of therapists in dealing with, and this young woman is on the autism spectrum?
Yeah, so, you know, they believe that a lot of these kids have sensory processing differences and how they perceive the world. Some may hear literally the pin drop, you know, outside the door out there, maybe hypersensitive or acutely, these can be real advantages too, have acute sensitivity in the auditory domain, or hyper-tactile sensitivity, or maybe some GI problems. And, you know, 30 minutes after they eat, maybe they're not saying anything, but we see their electrodermal activity going up, and that may be a sign of inward pain or discomfort. And it doesn't tell us exactly what's causing it. That's still a bit of a mystery. But it tells us that something's changed, even though we may not see the change otherwise.
And so therapists can then have a certain confidence that the conjectures they're making about the emotional state of this person they're working with is actually true.
Yeah, this is one dimension of emotion. It's the activation or arousal dimension. The part that, when it's really low, like if you're really depressed and you can't get out of bed, you can't take an action, this arousal level tends to be, you know, not even on the scale here. And if you're really attentive or excited, it's very high. Usually if you're initiating an action, if you're giving a talk, it's going to be high. We find reliably, though, when people are listening to PowerPoint, it goes
Way down.
really low.
And that's the kind of thing that,
Microsoft doesn't want to hear.
yeah, right, exactly. Philosophers don't want to hear that, yeah, exactly. But we would have expected that would be the case, right? I mean,
yes.
Let's talk a little bit about from the perspective of the person, and thanks so much for this here. From the
thank
person
you.
who's on the autism spectrum, who actually is experiencing the sort of signal-to-noise problems with either trying to interpret what's coming in from other people, facial expressions, et cetera, or maybe have a certain difficulty expressing, you know, what it is that's going on with themselves. How do tools like this help them to decode what's going on? Just talk a little bit about your experience there.
Yeah, so, well, people have asked for help reading faces. They've also asked for help understanding what's going on inside themselves. Many people are also alexithymic. They don't know what their own feelings are. In fact, I've run into this with just a lot of my computer science colleagues. When I started working on emotion, they're like, Roz, what do you mean? What's an emotion? I mean, like, they honestly didn't get this. And where this becomes a problem is if the emotions catch you off guard, because they all have emotions, but they, like most of us maybe have a gradual change in them. We're kind of aware that it's not going well and I'm heating up and I'm getting frustrated, and then maybe I might get angry. But for some of these individuals, these things just snap and catch them out of the blue, like a seizure or something, and the uncertainty of it just walloping you is part of what makes it so hard to manage. So if they could have something that could help them see it coming so it doesn't look like it's coming out of the blue, then that could help them prepare and maybe take steps to prevent it from knocking them out of whack.
And have you had success actually developing tools like that, or working with people where you can give cues where that actually has...
We're working on the cues now, and there's a lot of individuality. So, and we've worked a lot just to get the technology so that they're not tethered to a machine in the lab, because emotions are about what's real, and when you're creating them in the lab, it's not the real thing. When you get the technology finally to the form where people can wear it at home, at school, out on the playground, then they can start to see what's really going on with themselves. And so we've just passed those major hurdles where now it's out there. In fact, it's now being sold in limited quantities to researchers, and hopefully soon will be commercially available for everybody.
Let's look at the last video here, because I think you can really see the change in the emotional state here. Describe what's going on here.
Yeah, so here's a girl who, you can't, it's hard to know right here if she's excited positive or excited negative about getting on this, but a moment ago, right here she's telling her to look in the camera, and this is sort of excited negative, looking away, aversive. So this activation doesn't tell you if it's good or bad, and that's important. People put this on. We used to map these to glowing LEDs, and people would walk up and say, "You're glowing. Does that mean you like me?" And I'm like, "No, it might mean I hate you." We can't tell that. But we can see that she's very activated. Physical activity makes it go up. Cognitive activity and emotional activity make it go up. So here's a peak. And now when she starts swinging, this may be this rocking movement. It's very calming. And we see this nice decay, exponential decay here. And that continues the whole time she's on that swing.
And again, it really is a channel of information. You don't necessarily know what is going on with the transmitter. The receiver may not know exactly what the intent of the transmitter is. This last
There's still
video,
some mystery. Yeah.
This last video here is a real classic in the sense that we want to suspend our disbelief and actually embody objects with a certain level of animation with human emotional qualities. How does that happen here?
So this is Cynthia Brazil.
For the robot to be able to learn from people is being able to recognize communicative intent. Very good, Kismet. And the way we've done that with Kismet right now is to have the robot recognize by tone of voice. Yes. Are you praising it? Are you scolding it?
Where'd you put your body? No. No. You're not to do that. No.
But, I mean, so all of you want one of those? Is that what you're saying? Don't you have anyone to talk to at home? I mean, on the one level, my reaction to that is way cool, but on the other hand, if I think about it for a second, I mean, a sock puppet can do that, right? I mean, it's more about... It's more about what we want to believe is going on than what's actually going on, or am I wrong?
Well, if it's truly puppeteered, yes, and we all love the imaginary games with our kids, and I've done sock puppets and sock hats too. But here the challenge is to make an autonomous creature that is actually making the decision based upon what it hears and sees and senses from you as to what it should do next. And so if it senses that you're bidding its attention, then it looks attentive. And if it senses that you're praising it, it perks up and looks, pleased. And if it senses that you're scolding it from the tone of your voice and listening to that staccato and the pitches going down, then it it shirks back and looks sorry, which is something that, like, if the Microsoft Office assistant had done that when everybody got mad at it, it might not have, Bill Gates might not have gotten a standing ovation when he said the thing was going away, But instead, it looked happy when you got mad at it, right? It had that little smiley thing. And smiling at people when you're making them miserable is mean,
Hey, that's just great. I mean, I guess I don't know if I fear or embrace that moment when I open the laptop or look at my cell phone and the message on there is, hard night, huh, John? How you doing this morning, kind of thing. But in fact, it would help if computers that are going to have purportedly that intimate a relationship with us actually were paying attention.
We have a project like that now funded by the National Institute of Health with returning vets and people who struggle with substance abuse, who in a moment of feeling real despair about themselves, if they have a physiological signature that signals something like acute dependent cocaine craving, then our wristband can sense their pattern, when we're training the machine learning on this, and bring them emotional support or a buddy through the phone right then, instead of waiting for them to go out and get help when they maybe least feel like reaching out.
That's amazing. So Gary Small, is all this technology changing our brains, or is it pretty much a steady state since the 5th century before Christ, and we've just been sort of playing different games on the outside?
It's clearly changing our brains. Our brains are very sensitive to what's going on from moment to moment, whether you're looking at someone's facial expression, a person or a machine, no matter what it is, or if you're looking at a computer screen, or if you're reading a book, there's a cascade of neurochemical, neurophysiological, electrical events that are going on from moment to moment. So it's a very dynamic organ. And it's not only very changeable and dynamic from moment to moment, but it's very specialized. And if I could get to my first PowerPoint slide,
sure.
You don't mind?
Sure, yeah.
We're
A brave man.
on everyone's,
We'll mark the time.
But seriously, Luciano was saying that people worried that writing would affect memory. What we're seeing in these slides is actually real evidence that a lot is going on.
A lot is going on. Here you're looking at an experiment. There are 4 brains that are measuring an event. And the event is a single word. And one of the images, the volunteer is saying the word. In another image, the volunteer is just thinking about the word or hearing about the word. And you can see that very different areas of the brain are being triggered. The word is the same, but the way it's processed differs. And so you have a very different neural pattern. Now, an important point is that if we spend a lot of time in a particular mental experience over and over again, in a sense, the neural circuits controlling that experience will strengthen. And if we neglect other experiences, they'll weaken.
It's like practice makes perfect.
Yeah. And it does, but it's more complex than that, because in some ways, it can be very good. Our brains are a bit like our bodies. If you practice something quite a bit, our brains become more efficient. So in this experiment, for example, if you heard the same word over and over again, you wouldn't see as much neural activity, because your brain would be able to process it better and use less energy, just like when you go and you work out. You can do more and use less energy. So if we can go to the next image. Now, this kind of gets back to the emotional part of the brain. And, we can take something like texting or shorthand like this. How many of us text? Okay, how many of us are texting right now?
They won't answer, they're texting.
That's right. I learned how to text through my teenage daughter, and I can see how it brings out a feeling in me.
You can actually talk to her as well.
Now,
you obviously don't know her. Actually,
they text.
I actually said to her, I said, Rachel, when I'm talking to you and you're texting at the same time, I just don't get the sense you're listening. And so she looked up at me and said, "Don't worry, Dad, I don't do this with my teachers." So I was reassured. So,
Special just for you, Dad. Yeah.
but it brings out, we have very emotional relationships with our machines. So let's see if we can kind of, Jessica, yeah, okay, so here's
Great.
LOL is what?
Laugh out loud.
Okay, very good. Lots of love, that was somebody had a different, now this I thought was Good Morning America, but it's not. What is that? Great minds think alike. Let's try the next one. Now, this is something my daughter would text to me. If we can get the answer, get a life.
Get a life, nice.
Okay. And then this one, I won't tell her I know what it means. PRW means parents are watching. and then we can take to the next image, emoticons. We all know about the smiley face or the happy face. But then we can get creative. If we go to the next one, this is the startled face. You have to tilt your head. This is Elvis Presley. And does anybody know who this is? John Lennon, very good. So you can get creative with it, and you can see how we're just kind of looking at these symbols, and yet we're laughing and we're thinking about it. And you know, a lot of the parents are concerned that their kids are texting or they're using all this shorthand. I'm not so concerned about it because we know young brains are very malleable and flexible. They're great at learning languages. So
But just one thing on that great slide is that what it shows is that even though the emoticon is a tiny little symbol, there's an enormous amount of information stored in the brain that's triggered by very simple little symbols.
Yeah, and so it may be a small symbol, but it can be a huge reaction in the brain. And we've certainly seen that in our experiments at UCLA. So if we keep moving to the PowerPoint, because I've found I can't talk without PowerPoint, which annoys my teenager.
Yeah, but I'd love to see the fMRI of your brain right now, actually.
You're going to see it in a moment.
Yeah.
So, you know, if we look at this graph, I mean, this is obvious to most of us, and that is, as we get older, we're less inclined to use the technology. And this was actually an older study showing that only about a third of people who are 75 or older were using computers at the time they did that study. And now a lot more are using it today. Young people are particularly tech savvy. The Kaiser Family Foundation study recently reported that the average young person spends about 11.5 hours a day with their technology if you include multitasking, yet exclude homework from that. So that's a lot of time. So if we can move on to the next. So this just shows you, different parts of the brain are working, whether it's the emoticon or it's the book page. So
does that literally correspond to the places where?
I'll show you the article after the.
All right. No, I actually read the Google article. I mean, it is interesting that there is a certain spatiality to the kinds of things that you've studied here.
Yeah, I mean, we can compartmentalize the brain, and certainly different areas of the brain are quite specialized for these different kinds of functions. But in the next image, we can see an experiment that was done looking at something I've been concerned about that I expressed about my teenage daughter, and that is with all the technology input, that it may be affecting our ability to communicate face-to-face. That you don't have the eye contact, we're not learning to recognize nonverbal cues. And in this particular study, the scientists asked the volunteers who were in their late teens, early 20s, asked them to look at a face morph from, say, a neutral face to an angry face or to a happy face. And it was a little bit like a game show where they hit a buzzer and they timed it, and they found that when these volunteers played a violent video game before the experiment, they lost the happy face advantage. So there's a suggestion, at least with some kind of technology interaction, it may be interfering with that skill that we have as humans.
I'm not completely clear on that. So if you played the violent video game, you had difficulty identifying that there was a happy face present, or?
You were slower to recognize the emotional content of the face, but just the happy face.
Just interesting. And what do you think the implications of that are? That you view that the world is filled with people with guns who are trying to kill you?
Well, you're playing too many video games.
Yeah, well.
I
have to. It's part of my job. Yeah.
I think one implication is that when we're spending a lot of time with that kind of activity, it is distracting our emotional recognition neural circuits from doing their job. Now, it doesn't mean that the brain can't right itself. I think because the brain is quite plastic, we can change the brain quite quickly. So if we look at the next image, this is a study we did that we called Your Brain on Google. And we found people, we wanted to see what the brain looks like the first time it searches online. So the first part of the study was to try to recruit people who had never searched online. So I quickly learned you couldn't recruit them online. This was...
Nothing gets by you. No, sir. PhD. Yeah, there we go.
So, and actually it was an MD.
MD, right? MD, right. Yeah.
There you go.
LOL.
GAL. Anyway, so so we took a group of these people who were internet naive, and we compared them to internet savvy people. And so you're looking at a series of images here, and this is what we did. We put people in a functional MRI scanner, and so we can measure what the brain is doing from moment to moment with any kind of experiment. So we simulated what it was like to read a book page. And then we simulated an internet search, and the volunteers had little keypads that allowed them to operate a mouse, and they searched online. And we found that the brain pattern, the colored areas on those brains, were almost identical, regardless of whether somebody was internet savvy or internet naive, or whether they were searching online or whether they were reading a book. But the big difference, you can see that one brain that's red, where it was much larger activation, was when the internet savvy people searched online. So if we can just go to the next image, this is your brain on a book, and moving along, this is your brain on Google. And so there was a twofold increase in activity. Now, of course, the headlines were Google's making us smart, which isn't really exactly what we showed, but it did show that Google was activating the brain. And in fact, when we took those internet naive people, and these were people who were in their mid-60s, and we said, okay, we want you to practice searching online for a week, just an hour a day. After just 1 week, there was highly significant increase in areas of the brain, in the thinking brain, the frontal lobe, areas that control decision-making and very short-term memory.
And it wasn't like they couldn't recognize the smiles of their grandchildren anymore or lost the ability to do facial contact.
Well, we didn't do that experiment, so I don't know.
No. But you think this is a good thing, or you think this is something that demands a lot more study?
Well, I think it demands study, but I think it is good that our brains are so malleable. And you always hear about you can't teach an old brain new tricks. Well, I think you can. So I think that even an older brain is quite plastic.
Now, one of the things that I think is suggested by some of the things that you're talking about here, Gary, is that you're worried about the malleability of the brain in the sense that it's encountering technology right now that worries you. Explain precisely what the worry is. I mean, you've mentioned a little bit that other modes of communication might be degraded because of too much texting, et cetera. I mean, I think our assumption is that bandwidth will improve on a lot of these devices, so we're not always going to be doing LOL, but still. What is your chief concern here?
Well, my concern is that we are spending too much time with the technology. We love it. I mean, I love it. I use it all the time. And our brains, in a sense, are drawn to it. But we're just not making the right decisions about when to talk to each other. And I'm guilty of it myself. I get on that email, and I'm emailing, and somebody may be in the next office, but I don't get up and talk to them because it seems more efficient just to email them.
Luciano, does this sound a lot like the worrywarts back in the 5th century before the Christian era?
Well, it does a little bit in the sense that it has to do with the plasticity of the brain or the mind. At the end of the day, it's a little bit like, it's not what Gary was saying, but sometimes you read on the newspapers that, well, computers are making us stupid, or the internet or Google, which is a little bit like blaming cars for us being fat. Now, yes, but no. Like,
oh, you philosophers.
That was probably the best line, I can see.
That's a great line.
That's a great line.
You deliver it so well.
Well, you need the Italian accent with that, otherwise it doesn't work.
That is probably true.
Yeah, if you do it...
Although that's a specification of philosophy right there. Yes, but no.
No. Well, it's the drama with
Yeah.
the no.
Yeah.
Well, basically, the yes is yes, of course, obviously. No, you don't walk, you take the car to go and buy the milk, so obviously, now, that is not good, okay? But at the same time, I mean, who wants to do without cars, etc., and faster, more time to do other things and so on. Now, with computers, it's a little bit like that. Of course, they're ruining our lives, yes. Obviously, I have the BlackBerry turned off right now and has been turned off for an hour, and I'm a bit apprehensive, but it's okay. I can do that for another half an hour, maybe. I'm watching.
We're here to share. We're here to help you.
I'm ventilating. So on that is fine. But obviously, I mean, the main mistake is to think that that plasticity is subject to some kind of determinism, that now we have the technology and we're going to be in this tunnel and all is going to happen is, well, more use of that technology. We have no freedom, no choice. We can't do anything about it. I share the view that, of course, is what you do with it that it really makes a big difference. So one day we might stop using the car to buy the milk, and one day we might stop texting each other just and walk to the other place, double task in that way, and talk to the other guy next to the office. So the computers, when we started this whole enterprise, were there to make sure that we would save time for something else. Now, if they instead consume all the time, that's not good. But if we can use them to save the time to do something else, well, then is the kind of technology I want to see. That sort of.
Although there's a little dualism in there, and that they're out here and we're in here, when in fact, if we look at what Roz has been working on, there's actually a very closed loop between us and our machines. In some sense, you can view the development of Windows as computers run amok. But then if we look at some of the kinds of inputs, well, what if we design things differently? What if we recognize that for this relationship to have quality, it has to understand where we're coming from? This is an attempt to actually address some of these questions, to make the technology better. What do you think are the principles of modifying technology or creating devices that would maximize our ability to not simply go down a path of, as Gary's saying, having the time be completely consumed by computers, or sacrificing all kinds of other sorts of interactions?
Oh dear, you're asking me who lives on the computer. I think there are some rules about computers showing respect for people, but it's really rules for we who design them, and ultimately we have to ask what we want. Do we want to build things that surpass us and dominate us and kind of take over, like in a lot of the dystopic science fiction visions, or do we want to build things that augment us? And lately there's been a real, it's interesting, there's been a real pushback. Instead of just building artificial intelligences that are going to somehow be smarter than us, and as my friend and colleague Marvin Minsky says, we'll be lucky if they keep us around as household pets, that kind of machine. There's a push.
You get fed regularly if you're a household pet. Yeah.
He's presenting at another one of these times. Yeah, if you want to build something that makes you into its household pet, you can do that. I'm not going to do that. What we're finding is people want to build things that help them to learn more about themselves, to be more effective at the goals that they want to achieve. So the technology has become, the end result has not been to build the smartest machine, the brain that dominates our brain, but to build things that augment our brains and our bodies in ways that also help illuminate what's going on inside our brains and bodies. So we learn more about ourselves, and we still maintain control, and we have the choice to do new things now because we know more about ourselves.
John, what do you envision beyond the incredibly exciting, but admittedly sort of crude inputs and outputs that you've demonstrated here, which show that we have access to signals in the brain, pure signals in the brain? What do you envision as a kind of a really advanced use of your technology to do the kinds of things that Roz is talking about, to make us know better about ourselves, to augment us in ways that make us realize our goals, not simply to dominate the person in the next neighborhood?
We are beginning to face a time we'll be able to have much more inputs and outputs in and out of the brain, and we'll be able to experience things. We'll have the potential to be able to have able-bodied people experience things beyond what they currently can do. and we'll face the, if you could have bionic eyes that gave you a completely different set of vision, you had a completely different way of moving and interacting directly with the computer at very high rates. So these things are, science fiction still, but we're getting closer and closer. The early steps will be to have, for example, individuals who are both paralyzed and can't feel to start to feel again as well. That will present some dilemmas about how are we interacting with the world, because we'll have new channels that just aren't there.
Well, let's talk about consciousness. Where do philosophers stand on this? Did consciousness switch on at some point in human history, and that before that time?
I love easy questions. I really like easy questions like that.
What do you think?
That's what we hear. Well, we haven't got a clue, to be honest.
We say,
yeah, well, which is good for jobs in the future.
Right.
Like we won't.
But think,
no,
for instance, just do a thought experiment to the future. What if we could use John's technology to create in the brain a sort of internet residency, that basically there's something called sleep, then there's something called we wake up and we're conscious, okay, in the way that all of us primitive humans are right here. But would there be a way of residing in the brain, essentially the information space that is the internet? And would that represent a different form of consciousness, or would it represent just some appliance crammed into our heads that's making us in pain all the time? What would that represent?
Well, I think that just to guess, the view seems to be that it would be just basically an extension of your consciousness. You might keep in mind this kind of picture. You can treat the body, or what goes around the body, as your environment. Now, that environment may change, may improve, may go bust, may be replaced by a different environment. What you do within the environment, you, the gardener of that particular environment, is to enjoy the garden and keep the garden in the environment in the right shape. Now, with that picture in mind, what happens to the gardener if you change the environment is a bit of a difficult question to handle. Basically, you still have that kind of role of consciousness, but consciousness, you might imagine that it will be expanded by the new technology. It's a little bit like if anyone has gone to different places, scuba diving or on the peak of a mountain somewhere. Well, all of a sudden you have a different perspective of the world, your position in the world, what you can or cannot do, and that expands your vision for a moment, and then we get used to it again. So it's like walking in a new city. All of a sudden you see things that after a few days, a few weeks, they just become normal. You look at the pavement, or actually your BlackBerry. So kind of
then let's take that question. Do you think machines do that? Do machines create experiences, or are they capable of creating experiences that simulate, say, the look back from the moon to the Earthrise, which transformed all of us, an image that before we had it, we were different. Now that we have it, it's a fundamentally different sort of level of consciousness, even though the brain activity may have gone back to the sort of low ebb. It's a revolutionary moment. Do you think machines are capable of doing that?
Well, I actually like to just turn around and throw out a question that sort of, since philosophers can ask questions, I can be a pseudo-philosopher for a second. But I think that this whole idea of how we interact and what is consciousness, what if we are able to perfect an in and output system to the brain where you can have Second Life being driven directly from your brain, Second Life the computer.
Second Life being the avatar community online that
yes. So your thoughts are moving you through a computer, and those sensations are coming back directly into your brain, and your body is just sitting there. This is the Matrix, right? So as my son came in, when he heard one of the early reports on what we did, he said, "Dad, you are the Matrix." So we aren't. We aren't the Matrix, but it does. But we are.
That's. I wish my kids said, "Dad, you're the Matrix."
but it does raise the issue.
Instead of, "You're such a pain in the ass."
That's more like it. But it is, in fact, it will create, as you can put things more and more directly or indirectly into the brain, in and out of the brain, does that reality become another consciousness? So I said it's a question. I don't really know what the answer is. It's certainly a very long time away before it's an accurate read in and read out, but that raises an interesting dilemma.
Well, can I just jump in here? So if you've got these electrodes, and the research volunteer is controlling the computer, right? Or controlling a robot. why can't that volunteer project a thought wirelessly to someone else's computer? I mean, why can't that happen?
We saw it in Pong. That's what he's doing when he's playing Pong.
So why can't we have this consciousness? Why can't we communicate without moving our mouths? Why won't there be that? I mean,
that wasn't consciousness. That was the intention to move. And interestingly, if you ask him, what are you doing? He doesn't really know. Just like when you brush your teeth in the morning, you say, what instructions is your brain giving your hand? You don't know what it is. It just happens. You know?
Okay, I'm going to project a thought to you right now. You tell me.
Yes, it's concern. I can on your brow. Thank you.
Yeah, but we don't necessarily need an appliance to get that information, because that's what the information channel is on the face. But can you envision what John is talking about, Roz? A channel where some sort of pure information can go into a computer and create a kind of virtual mapping of reality in a place like Second Life? Do you think that's possible?
Yeah, I mean, people are already mapping anything we can measure off the body into things in games. We've done this in our lab too. Early on, we were mapping our physiology to your character in a game. So if you got excited, your character got big and excited, which made it able to see over walls. This was an early version of Doom, and shoot more people. Of course, it also made you an easier target too. So we would, change the game in some interesting ways there, and you would start to get some feedback, learning about maybe what that feeling was inside you that was causing that external change. Again, this helps with people who don't really know what that feeling is. And then after you've done this a while, you now have names for these feelings that you didn't know before. I now know what it feels like when my electrodermal activity changes. If you used our thing, you'd know that too, right? And people around me sort of joke like, oh, she probably is going to say her EDA went up. Yeah, I can tell. In fact, I've debugged some sensors. Once I'm like, it's going up, but the sensor's not changing. And checked it, and sure enough, the battery had gone dead.
So we saw with the Kismet video there that you can create what appears to be an autonomous machine that can reflect a channel of emotional information back. How far can that go? Can you envision a machine that can use that emotional channel in its sort of physical interactions with humans, but also embody actual autonomous intelligence that can basically come in and ask how you're doing and be your friend and literally be your friend in some computational way?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. Yes, we're the whole social robot effort and all, the affective computing and social robotics merging there, is very much focused on, what would it take to build something like that? A creature that could sense and respond to your feelings that you choose to display. There's also ways to sense things maybe that you don't choose to display, and that gets into some other territory. But maybe reading the regular social cues that we all give off and responding to those the way you would expect a person to. And yes, that can facilitate friendship and companionship.
Does it turn us all into lie detectors wandering around potentially, or that cops would have these kinds of sensors, or that governments would basically use this information to say?
I was at this meeting in Washington where they, what are they called, the assessment research summit, credibility assessment research is no longer calling it lie detection, it's credibility assessment research, CARS.
And this was in Washington where they have credibility assessment.
Yeah.
Who would have thought?
Yeah, what a bunch of chuckleheads.
There are an enormous number of ways that you can imagine governments are interested in reading what's going on, especially with the rise of terrorism. Are we more stressed than we should be when we're standing in line at the airport? The classic polygraph lie detector tests measure a lot of the same signals that change with emotion, because in fact it's the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response, that they're usually looking at to be most reliable changing in lie detection. So in fact, the signals in here are signals that are used in lie detection. However, when I wear this and we play with it, and my kids play with it, and people in our lab play with it, they quickly learn, one thing you can learn is very easily how to fool a lie detector test, because you can learn what makes this go up and down that is different from lying. Things that excite you positively can make it go up. Things that embarrass you can make it go up. Sticking a thumbtack under your big toe and thinking of stepping on it when they ask you a question can make it go up. Pain, the mere threat of pain, just holding the pin near somebody and threatening to jab them will make it go up. The old ouch before the shot even goes in causes that response.
But let's think in terms of sort of defining intelligence here. I can imagine a job at an airport, and you're sort of specifying it there, of somebody who maybe is in a room with a bunch of screens that's scanning a crowd of people at an airport going through security. Mm-hmm. And that person has, as the algorithm in their brain, the task of, all right, who's looking strange, and they're scanning an enormous amount of data. They're using these information channels you've already described, facial information, the way they stand, they sit, maybe they're compositing also racial information, all sorts of things, and all that information. Then they're coming to a conjecture that says, that person, pull them out of the line and go search them. Now, if you can make a machine that will do that, right? Maybe it will be wrong, maybe it will be right, but you can make a machine that can...
Make a machine that detects a lot of these things and profiles clusters that look atypical.
Is that intelligence?
I call it pattern recognition. Some people say all of intelligence is pattern recognition. I think something like that could be used in a very unintelligent way.
That's for sure.
In a very... in a way that makes false assumptions. These things are complicated. There are ways that they can really be, misled. For example, when we had the Wearable Computing Symposium in Boston, we had quite the scare right before, because one of our MIT students went to the airport to pick up her boyfriend that morning, and she was wearing a breadboard she had made and worn at MIT all week that had a 9-volt battery hanging off of it, and it had her name on it. It was her name tag. At MIT, it was kind of boring to have a "my name is" with a magic marker on it. It was more fun to build a breadboard with your name on it. So she wears it all week. She gets up after a couple hours sleep, working on a problem set all night, goes to Logan Airport wearing her "my name is" star breadboard, LEDs, and a 9-volt battery, and is immediately arrested, gunpoint, and they said she's lucky she cooperated, or she could be in the morgue. Now, she could do eye contact. She's very social. A person who has been up all night, who might be kind of geeky and doesn't ordinarily do eye contact, or somebody for whom eye contact is threatening. Yeah.
That's meaningful up at MIT.
Yes.
Yeah, or like all the people coming in town for this wearable computing conference who are encouraged to wear their computers, showing up at Logan Airport right after this. These kinds of things could cause some, what I would say, very unintelligent reactions, right? Where people are not informed and jump to the wrong conclusions.
Putting aside the question of false positives or false negatives, is a capability, a machine that could do that, intelligent in any sense, Gary?
I think it depends on how you define intelligence, and I think in many
We're
ways...
becoming philosophers here.
Yeah.
Just for the record.
Or as my friend would say, yes and no.
Okay. Learning fast.
It sounds better with an Italian accent, I gotta tell you.
Definitely.
In some ways it is intelligent, but in other ways it's kind of stupid, because it's very easy for the computers, the machines, to go wrong. I think
But maybe the bigger question is, yes, we can make things that can do various tasks that make us afraid, or, hey, isn't that cute? I guess the question, and John Donoghue, I'll put this to you, at what point does a machine that computationally specifies some set of tasks that humans have traditionally done, when does that become intelligence? And when is it just an appliance, or is the threshold really undetectable? Is it something we're only going to know like 1,000 years in the future?
Well, philosophers spend their days arguing about what is intelligence. I think we can get machines to mimic a huge number of functions that we do. So, if we wanted a machine to recognize your flute here, actually it would be very hard for it to do because it's never seen one, but we could train a machine to do that. And then would it be intelligent? It would recognize a flute. If I move the flute around, the computer wouldn't be able to recognize it, because, you would say, no, it's dumb because it can see a flute in this configuration but not in another one. We have these amazing abilities to do things like generalize and look at the world and understand in depth but also in breadth about things. And I think machines, we just don't understand how the brain does that. And it's a really miraculous function. It's a kind of computation that is beyond our understanding now.
But is that to say that there is no computational specification of what the brain does and we will never have it? Or we're on our way to it and we may get there in thousands and thousands of years? Because there's it's an important distinction.
So, brains are very complex structures. They are unlike the computer on your desk in almost every way you can imagine. Neurons don't act like chip circuits in any way. They are very complex, noisy, kind of unreliable individual elements. So there are thousands of neuroscientists trying to understand the way that neurons turn, for example, a bunch of electrical and chemical impulses into something like consciousness. So what happens usually in these kinds of processes is that somebody may stumble on this idea of how we are computing, how we're making intelligent decisions. So I could say it could be a day away and it could be 1,000 years away. I think we are understanding more and more and more about biological processes, so we're getting closer and closer, but when that trip day happens, we don't know. It will be transformational, I think, though.
Do you fear that trip day if it exists, Gary?
You know, I both fear it and crave it in a way, because I'm a big sci-fi buff. I love thinking about what our capacity is when it comes not just to the human mind, but how we can create machines that mimic our minds. But in a way, it's kind of a semantic discussion here. It depends on how we define intelligence. I mean, these phones that we're all carrying, we call them smartphones, right? And so how is being smart different from being intelligent?
Well, I guess the question is not so much whether it's intelligence. I mean, and it is a semantic question, and we could sit up here and argue it forever. But the question is this, the way this interacts with my brain, the fact that I said here, and maybe that's wrong, that it speaks hand in some way, and therefore impulses, feedbacks from this beautiful object become in my brain a way of speaking music out. Is there a way, is there a machine, is there a way to amplify this in some sense that creates robots that would be a good thing, friends, that would be like human beings, that would be another species? What do you think, Luciano?
Well, I think that the question is certainly a little bit on what we mean by, as usual. But if I may answer sort of indirectly, you can run something like a Turing test on this.
Turing test, right.
A Turing test, if someone doesn't know, it's you put two entities on the other side of the wall, you ask questions, you're not told whether one is a human or a computer, and you are supposed to guess, roughly speaking. And you have a certain amount of time, and after that amount of time, you have to toss your coin and say, well, I was speaking to a robot, or I was speaking to a human. And Turing predicted that at his time, which was a few years ago, we would not have been able to tell the difference, roughly speaking again, given a certain amount of time zone. Now, if that is a good test to decide whether something is performing as well as a human being, for example, if someone is a human being playing the flute, or a computer, well then I think we are already there in a number of cases. Now, in terms of imitations, sometimes, especially if you are in a computer science department, you're not quite sure whether you're talking to a colleague or not.
Especially if they don't do eye contact.
Yeah, no eye contact. That's definitely overrated. So in terms of music, for example, we already know that some software produces music that only the very best expert will be able to spot whether that is really Mozart or not. Now, having said that, now, if the imitation game is in question, then I think we're getting there more and more. Mm-hmm. If what is in question is getting the real thing, I don't want to have something that swims like a submarine. I want to have someone that swims like me. I want something that thinks like me, not something that does what I can do by thinking the way I do. Well, then we haven't got a clue.
Before we go, and thanks so much for a fascinating discussion, who is optimistic or pessimistic about the way these things are progressing? John, just to sort of, and we'll just move down the panel here.
I think that's very exciting. I think the promise both to help people with health-related things and also to enrich people's lives is very great. It's something we have to be cautious about how we handle it, and these kinds of discussions are just the kinds of things that help us think about the implications.
Luciano?
I'm optimistic on the technology, a little bit less about the humans who are actually using it.
Gary?
As one of those humans who uses the technology, I'm optimistic. I think that we're going to figure out a way to use this stuff to improve our quality of life so that we manage it in a way so it enhances our life, not detracts from it.
I hope so.
Roz?
I'm optimistic, but, and here's my philosophy line here, I think we technologists really benefit when people challenge us with the ways things could go wrong so that we can think up front about how to design things differently to hopefully prevent some of those things.
Well, I would like to say that I'm thrilled to have any of the tools that I have, from the vice grips over here to the flute that I hold in my hand, to any of the ones that we've talked about here. And I think it is about the quality of the interaction. And thank goodness we have them. I'd like to thank this panel for just a fabulous time. Thanks to all of you. Good night.